Hey, it's my guest, Tony Defazio. I want to thank you for coming on the show today, Tony. How you doing?
Doing well, Mark. Happy to be here.
Thank you. We're going to get right into it. Talk a little bit about your journey to become a sports writer.
Yeah, well, like a lot of us, sports kind of dictated to me when that was going to be done, when that was no longer going to be a career option. Played sports my whole life. Once I realized, okay, and accepted the idea that that wasn't going to happen at a professional level, at a college level, wanted to stay around it. So I decided I was going to try to become a sports writer. That's what I intended to do all through college. I went to the University of Pittsburgh with as an English writing major, which was basically their version of a journalism degree. And then I kind of took a turn after that and got into, I was actually working in corporate public relations for a number of years, but still had the itch of trying to write sports, and did some freelancing a little bit here and there with some small publications, and then hooked up with a group of guys who started their own publication in Pittsburgh, and was writing for them and still doing PR, and then did more and more writing. And as they had more and more success, an opportunity came up to make that jump. And I used to tell people I made that jump, and I only ever wore a jacket and tie at a funeral or a wedding after that point.
Good stuff. Hey, did you have an aha moment, or was there something that inspired you to want to be a sports writer?
I just got to the point where I realized I didn't enjoy the corporate world. I realized that wasn't the place that I wanted to spend, 40 years working in. And I was watching this group of guys put together a publication called the Pittsburgh Sports Report. This was in the late 90s. And they started to get some traction. I was writing for them a little bit, and they started to have more and more success. And we sort of had the conversation, like, what would it take for me to join you guys? What would that look like? The answer wasn't pretty financially, but kind of realized if I don't do this now, I'm probably never going to be able to do it. It was a situation where I was part of the whole team, and I wasn't coming in as like an entry level writer being told to go cover smaller stuff all over the place. I was right in there. We were covering the major Pittsburgh stuff from the get go. And again, the chance, I would never have it. If I passed it up, I would have never had that chance again. It did come to an end after about 15, 16 years, but I don't regret any of it. It was a remarkable opportunity and a unique opportunity that I'm thrilled I was able to be part of.
Kind of like high risk, high reward there when they
Definitely.
gave you the opportunity. Was there any particular writer you admired, or anybody you read a lot that inspired your style of reporting?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a little bit. I always liked the late Dick Schaap was always the guy that I liked. I got to know him from watching him on television on ESPN and stuff, and then I started to read some of his stuff. Probably some of the writers who inspired me the most weren't really sports guys. Like Cameron Crowe was a guy who he writes movies now and has for a long time, but he was writing for Rolling Stone and all those like rock and roll magazines back in the 70s when he was in junior high school. I always thought that was extremely cool. Contemporary guy who's not really a sports guy is Chuck Klosterman. He does some sports writing, writes novels and stuff. Those are the kind of guys who I probably was inspired by the most. But if I had to pick a sports writer right now, active, Mike DeCourcy was a Pittsburgh guy, wrote for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette back in the day.
Yeah.
Writes for the Sporting News now. He's a Hall of Fame basketball writer. Real talented guy, very generous. I got to meet him several times and got to know him after I entered the business. And I was a guy who, was a 31-year-old rookie rookie in the sports writing world. And he was a famous guy already and sort of welcomed me with open arms and very generous and just gave me great advice and stuff. So I always have a soft spot for Mike.
I follow him on Twitter. He makes very calculated and insightful tweets when he does respond to stuff. So I really admire that instead of shooting from the hip like a lot of guys like to do.
Well, exactly. And that's it's easy to shoot from the hip now because everybody does it. And that's just not who Mike is.
You've covered college, you covered pro. Which one have you enjoyed more, and why?
I have a soft spot for college sports, even high school sports as well. I love the community. The community feel, being on a college campus the day of a football game or a basketball game, the student sections, the cheerleaders, the band, all that stuff. I love that pageantry on the Saturdays. And again, even, Friday nights, the same thing. I love high school and college sports. You're not going to see the same level of efficiency that you see, by the pros, but And I love college too, because I love seeing kids use sports as a means to improve their life, improve their livelihood. I love that about college sports. And, you know, the media and I think fans sometimes tend to look at those high-level college athletes as spoiled, you know, thugs maybe, and nothing could be further from the truth. The vast, vast majority of those kids are going to work their butts off and will run through a brick wall. They appreciate what they have. Most of them. You always see this, you know, there's always the bad apples and everything, but I just love the fact that those kids, for the most part, appreciate what they have and appreciate, you know, where it could lead them. I think that's a pretty neat thing. That's why I love sports so much too.
What do you think social media has done in terms of reporting and things like you're saying there, you know, people perception of universities and the perception of kids? I mean, I know that wasn't a question I necessarily was going to come at you with, but I heard you say something there that sparked that in me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example. It's certainly different now. I mean, I can tell you this. I am thrilled that there was no social media when I was that age because it would have not been good. There's too many, you know, we talked about, you know, shooting from the hip. When you're younger, you do that. You tend to do that more. So I think you do see younger athletes, maybe athletes who haven't had money and all of a sudden now who do have money. You know, I think that was it's an avenue that we didn't have, thankfully, and that, you know, people our age didn't have. Otherwise, there would have been trouble. You know, Jack Lambert could have tweeted something that would have gotten him in trouble back in the day. Who knows? He had a temper, right? Joe Green did. I mean, you know, Lynn Swann liked the limelight. Those guys, social media with those guys, we probably would think of them differently. So, you know, without social media, Antonio Brown might still be a productive member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. You know, so I just think it's a danger. It's a dangerous thing. I've seen a lot of kids get in trouble with it, and that's now, you know, colleges, I guess pro teams do it too. Man, they are teaching you classes on how to handle social media. And I know a lot of kids, a couple of Pitt basketball players last year said they needed to just get off of social media for a while because there's too much there. Not only is the opportunity to say what's on your mind, but you're reading everybody else shooting from the hip as well. And when I got to think that would affect you at any age, but when you're 18, 19, and you have people telling you how lousy you are or the opposite, how great you are, it's easy to believe those things, I guess.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned Pitt basketball, so let's talk a little bit about that. They've had their struggles, and they flourished under Coach Capel. They also struggled mightily under Kevin Stallings, but, you know, under Jamie Dixon, they were a consistent winner on the floor, but didn't do as well when they got to the dance. So what do you think's going on? Is Capel the right guy for that program?
You know, if we had no COVID this year possibly affecting this, you know, the sports landscape, I think this would be a huge year to answer that kind of question for Capel. They took some great steps last year, and then things sort of started to fall apart at the end of the season. They went back into a slide, and you look at the numbers weren't much better than they were the year before. They have a great recruiting class coming in on paper. You know, you know as well as anybody that things on paper don't always translate to the hardwood, but it looks like that was a great hire. It really does. I don't know that they deserve to get a hire as good as Capel, quite honestly. I think that Capel was in a unique position where he was on the bench with Coach K for a number of years after the success he had and the struggles he had as a head coach. And I think he was waiting for what he thought was a prime opportunity. I think it speaks to the potential of Pitt basketball that Capel took the job. You know, he wasn't desperate for a job. So I think all those things point to the potential of success. You know, you know, you talked about Dixon. I think that Pitt fans sometimes need to be careful what they wish for. They were saying things got a little stale under Jamie Dixon. Well, you know, he didn't win enough big games. Well, they solved that. They don't play in big games anymore, you know, without him. So
exactly.
The Kevin Stallings hire was maybe one of the worst decisions that Pitt has made, and that's saying a lot. They've made a lot of bad decisions. Jamie Dixon, his last team, even though his ACC years weren't great, he left them with the team that made the NCAA tournament. They did lose in the first round. They won 2 games in the ACC tournament that year. Yeah. 5 starters returned, and they had 2 players coming off the bench in Cameron Johnson and Ryan Luther, who ended up transferring and becoming major stars. Cam Johnson's playing in the NBA right now. So that was the 7 players that he gave, that team under Kevin Stallings had. He won 4 ACC games that year.
Cam
the
Johnson was a
collapse was
local talent, right?
just remarkable.
Cam Johnson was a local talent up in Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, both Luther and Johnson. Cam Johnson came out of the Moon area, Our Lady of Sacred Heart, a real small little Class A school, and Ryan Luther played up north, Hampton, maybe. He was from the Hampton area.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean they had some local talent. They had 5 starters returning from that team, plus those 2 off the bench, and I don't know how that collapse happened, but boy, it was quick and it was ugly to watch. And then they don't win a game the next year, and practically the whole team transfers. So Capel took over a very, very difficult job. Again, I think Pitt was lucky to get him, and I think this year, provided they play a full schedule and everything goes the way you would want it to, even if they start late, I think this will be a very, very telling year. They have talent; they're getting better, but it's real tough to play in the ACC. When you're rebuilding a program from scratch.
He didn't seem to be shaken. He had, 2, 3 kids transfer out after this season.
Yep.
Doesn't seem to shake him. And I love that about him because, for a coach like that, he just wants guys who want to be there for him. And quite frankly, 2 of the 3 guys that transferred out were contributors. So
yeah, no question. I mean, they ended up at Tulane and Nebraska. So, these are kids that can play. And, these were guys who, like you said, were major contributors. So I think that's what you mentioned him not being shaken. I think the experience he had, not only at Duke, but being a head coach and seeing he took an Oklahoma team to the Elite 8. He had some recruiting issues there, got fired from a job. I think, again, that kind of stuff, has helped him sort of steel him as a head coach. And I think if you're trying to do the job he's doing, that's an important character trait he has, to not be shaken. And yeah, some of those teams are going to get blown out sometimes, when you put the teams that he's putting on the floor against some of those ACC top tier teams. And again, it's just, forget about it, go back and play the next game. His teams never stopped coming, which I think was the most important thing. Kevin Stallings' teams were quitting a lot. And I don't remember a Capel team, a blowout here or there, yeah, but a Capel team that quit, you didn't see that very often.
I love listening to him talk. So let's say Capel starts stringing together some wins and he starts doing some good things. A big-time basketball program comes calling. Let's say Coach K decides to call quits. Does he go back there if they come knocking at his door, or are those too big of shoes to fill? I mean, that could be a setup going back to Duke.
I interviewed Johnny Majors before he passed away, 2012, 13 maybe. And, he won a national championship in 4 years at Pitt. And in 1976, in the offseason, his alma mater came calling. And, he was very, very open talking about it, decades later, saying that, that was a mistake. I should not have gone back to Tennessee. But if I had to do it all over again, I don't know how I could have said no. He said your ego gets to the point where you had some success, and now all these fans and all these people are telling you how much they want you to come home. It's hard not to. So, maybe Capel has gotten to the point where, he's had enough experience, and maybe, like you said, that's, following Coach K is going to be a real tough job. Following Dean Smith at UNC was really, really difficult.
Roy Williams has done a great job.
Yeah, no doubt. You look at Penn State. Bill O'Brien did a phenomenal job following Joe Paterno, but talk about a hard job. Now, the circumstances were obviously very, very different.
Right.
But it's tough to replace a legend. But I just don't see how Capel could say no to that. And I will say this. If Duke decides that they want Jeff Capel, in my opinion, that means Pitt basketball will have reached some unprecedented heights. So if Duke is the program that pulls Capel away, Pitt fans will probably have had some fun nights watching their team on a pretty big stage.
Maybe Brandon Knight will get his shot finally, huh?
Timing now would be perfect for Brandon Knight. Yeah, let's suppose another 3 or 4 years go by and Capel does get Pitt to that level. Yeah, now, I think Brandon Knight was probably a little bit too young to take the job when they gave it to Stallings, although hard to imagine it could have turned out worse.
Yeah.
But yeah, Brandon Knight is really cutting his teeth now. Rutgers is starting to have some success as well. So that would almost be a perfect scenario. I
want to flip over to Pitt football a little bit. I live in Maryland, and Coach Narduzzi's been recruiting hard here for Pitt football. They pulled 2 kids from my high school 2 years ago. A.J. Wood, a defensive back, and DeAndre Jules, a defensive lineman. They also grabbed the kid from the town I live in, Frederick, Maryland, very sought-after receiver, and Jordan Addison, whom I'm familiar with the kid. They went out and got themselves a 4 or 5-star transfer quarterback to replace Pickett when Pickett's done after this year. The defense returning this year is, I'll tell you what, I just saw a thing last night. I was reading they're ranked the #1 defense in the ACC going into the preseason. It could be a special year for them if they can get that offense rolling. Talk a little bit about Pitt football, your impressions of the direction you think they're headed, and if you think Coach Narduzzi is actually the guy to get them to where they need to be again.
You know, boy, Pitt football is such a difficult monster to get your hands on. You know, they haven't been able to get out of their own way for so long. Finally started to have some success under Dave Wanstead. You know, one bad season, and admittedly, Wanstead he underachieved big time his final year. But you know, again, be careful what you wish for, because they did not do a very good job replacing him, and it's been a battle since then. I think they've been patient with Narduzzi. I think if you look at what Narduzzi was able to accomplish along with Mark D'Antonio at Michigan State, and you look at that side by side with what's going on at Pitt, it looks awfully similar. Things are starting to trend in that direction. If they are able to have a full season this year, I really agree with you. I think that this is the first time in a long time that there are high expectations, and they're legitimate expectations. That defense, like you said, it was a really good defense last year, and they're returning a couple of guys who missed 2 defensive tackles, who missed all of last year.
Right?
So yeah, it's very exciting. I think that defense is finally, it's really on paper exactly what Narduzzi envisioned. It looks like the Michigan State defense athletically, really level by level by level. It looks the same as the great defenses he had at Michigan State. You know, they've got a couple of players who could be on NFL rosters right now who decided to come back for those for their senior seasons. Paris Ford, you know, just a remarkable player. Kind of reminds you, I'm not going to compare him to the kind of pro Troy Polamalu was, but he's all over the field, just like number 43 was for the Steelers. A hard hitter, an athletic kid. So yeah, that defense, again, saying they're the best in the ACC, that's a big statement. You know, Virginia Tech has a good defense. North Carolina, I haven't even mentioned Clemson. Miami is loaded with talent. So, you know, I think Kenny Pickett was a little bit, quite frankly, got a little bit, I don't want to say he's underrated, but I think he got some unfair criticism last year. He didn't have much of an offensive line or much of a running game. Obviously, those things go hand in hand. And they had a lot of drops too. So, and you know, he was still able to put up those numbers. He's got a coordinator coming back again. So he's working with the same coordinator for the second year in a row. Defensively, the same thing. Just a lot of positives going on for Pitt. Now, Mark, the problem is Pitt's been in this situation before, and that's when they go 7-6 and a coach gets fired. And, you know, it's 5 years before we talk about that again. So Narduzzi's defense, he's not been that coach. This is the first time he has it where he has it. Recruiting has been very, very good, as you mentioned. Not only the Maryland area, but Virginia, that whole area. They're doing that whole region. They're doing a great job. Narduzzi has a challenge that most Pitt coaches hasn't had. The WPIAL is not what it once was. All of Western PA is not what it once was. Right. Even 15 years ago, you had a lot more players to choose from. So that's a challenge that Narduzzi has to deal with that other coaches haven't. Again, I mentioned that this was going to be a big year for Jeff Capel. I think an even bigger year for Narduzzi. Because if they don't succeed, if they have, slip-ups, if they lose games to teams that they're better than, that Pitt fan base is not very patient. They're going to be calling for his head. They were early last year.
Yeah, they were.
He loses to Clemson in the ACC title game and people want him fired. So, but I think he has him in a great direction. And I guess we have to wait and see if we even can get a full season. One
thing I think he has, and it's because he's returning a lot of veteran players, is he's got some leadership there. Just a lot of things I read, see, I follow a lot of those guys on Twitter. They're veteran leaders, and they don't make poor choices about what they put out there, where some guys do. And I love that. Somebody's in their ear, or he is definitely recruiting kids with high character. I know the two kids he grabbed from my high school, and he was going after a big-time recruit from my high school, but he chose a different school. But the kids he's recruiting are character kids. Like the AJ Wood kid, I know very, very well. DeAndre Jules, I know very well. Pretty high character kids. I think those are the kind of kids that get your program to that next level, to be honest.
Mark, I think that's a phenomenal point. Those are the kind of kids he won with at Michigan State. And I think you started to see that last year. Pitt won some games last year that previous Pitt teams would have lost.
Yep.
Sometimes it wasn't always pretty. Sometimes they let teams come back in the fourth quarter. But several times, 4 or 5 times, they found a way to win games that a year before, 2 years before, 3 years before they would have lost. I think he lets kids develop that leadership on their own. He does close ranks a lot. And he tries to keep the media and everybody out. But I don't think he dominates those kids. I think he lets the kids find their footing. I only really covered them for Narduzzi's first year, a little bit his second year as well, so I can't comment on him as much as I could the coaches before him. And I was a big fan of Paul Christ's. I think exactly what you're talking about. I think you saw that take place on the field last year. They just won games, and they didn't have those mental meltdowns.
Right.
When everything was going poorly, they found a way to withstand it and somehow eke out a win.
I took my son to the North Carolina game.
Perfect example.
It was a great, right there. And you know what? We sat in the family section because one of the kids who I had in class hooked me up with some tickets. And Trey Tipton, who was out for the season, he saw my son sitting there. My son moved down to the front row. We were 5 rows back. He wanted to sit front row. It was his first Division I college football game. He's 10 years old. And Trey saw him sitting there, and he came over and he starts talking to him up in the crowd in between stuff. And he brings him over a towel, and he says to my son, he says, every time we're on defense and it's 3rd down, I want you to stand up and wave this towel and scream as loud as you can. And I thought, wow, that right there tells me a lot about who's in this program as well.
Yeah.
He's from the Apollo. He went to Apollo Ridge, and I went to Kiski area growing up. So I know a lot of his extended family and people like that, and they speak very highly of him. But that right there was my first experience of seeing that kid in person, and it really showed me what that program was all about.
That's a great example. And again, talk about a kid who is extremely high character. Tipton, clearly is one of those kind of kids. And that was the word on him coming out of high school. And that's an experience your son's never going to forget.
Right.
That's a really cool thing.
So does Pitt need a football stadium?
That's such a tough question. I mean, one thing I think is one of the biggest fallacies in Pittsburgh sports is Pitt does not draw. Playing off of campus hurts. There's no question about that. But Pitt didn't draw. They didn't sell out Pitt Stadium when they were going 11-1 every year under Jackie Sherrill. Right. 1976, they didn't average a sellout that year. They sold out West Virginia, Penn State, Notre Dame. When they would go, 9-3, they would have 20,000 empty seats in that stadium. So Pitt, for whatever reason, be it the fact that it's an urban campus, it's not a sprawling campus like a Penn State or an Ohio State or a Michigan. Couple that with their shocking lack of success, quite frankly, their shocking mediocrity over the past 40-something years.
Yeah.
If they win, they're going to get fans, whether it's at Pitt Stadium or whether it's at Heinz Field. When Dave Wanstead played Cincinnati the last game of the season in December for the de facto Big East championship back in 2008, that place was sold out. That was as loud a game as I've seen in that stadium. It was as exciting a Pitt game as I've ever seen. Of course, Pitt being Pitt, they lose in the last minute. But it was a phenomenal football game. You go back about 5 years before that. Not Penn State, not Notre Dame, not West Virginia. Pitt filled that place up under Walt Harris to play Virginia Tech on a Saturday afternoon. ESPN Game Day was there. Lusaka Polite scores a touchdown in the last minute of the game to win the game. Fans will come if Pitt wins. If Dave wants to, I'm sorry, I'm living in the past here.
Yeah.
If Pat Narduzzi puts together a winner, are they going to get 55, 60 every single game? No. But when the big games come, it's going to be loud. It's going to be close to being full. I just don't know where you put a stadium in Oakland at this point. Losing Pitt Stadium, gosh, it's so many great memories, such a great tradition. I think it's in the past, and I think Pitt's going to have to play, on the north side from here on out. I just don't see a stadium being built there.
What kind of job do you think Heather likes doing as AD? She's been there a few years now. I feel like she's put her stamp on some things. I think there's some things she needs to do yet. What do you think?
I think I agree with you. I think the jury's still out a little bit. I think that she made a very good decision with the basketball program. I think the patience that she showed Pat Narduzzi is going to pay off. Sometimes the best move is not making a move. Steve Peterson maybe wishes that he had done that.
Yeah.
Sometimes patience is good. She made some decisions with the wrestling program that I don't agree with. I think she alienated some alumni. They hired. I don't think you had to hire a Pitt guy, but there was a lot of interest from former Pitt wrestlers. A lot of Pittsburgh people were interested in that job, and the decision to not interview some of those people, I think made some people react in such a way that maybe they weren't sure if she was trying to make a statement or what, but I think she did alienate some people there. The Olympic sports are probably going to be a good measuring stick. Can she get girls basketball back to a respectable, spot? The volleyball team has been very good. Can they get baseball and softball playing up to the kind of a level that they can be successful in the ACC? Those are all questions that are still out. I think they're making the right moves on campus to try to give those teams the resources they need. But at the end of the day, Mark, it comes down to whether Jeff Capel has success and whether Pat Narduzzi has success.
Yes, there's no doubt about it.
If you do, you're going to forgive a lot of other things.
I'll tell you, they recruit my high school for not only football, but they come down, they recruited for track. Shaim Wright. I don't know if you're familiar with Shaim. He's another one of my kids. Adita Pasima, wow. Outstanding track athletes. And it didn't take much to sell them on Pitt. I'm just amazed how many kids come from Germantown, Maryland and go up and go to school at Pitt, either for athletics or just the education. And I know Pitt's a great school, but it's a good thing in my opinion. Even though I've been here 20 some years, I always say you can take the man out of the burg, but you can't take the burg out of the man.
I'm right there with you.
You've had experience covering the Pittsburgh Pirates. Is the problem the owner, philosophy, drafting, the GM? What is it in your opinion? And can they turn this thing around without a salary cap?
The problem, I think, I'll answer yes to all those. I'll give you an easy answer and just say yes. They're not going to win in Pittsburgh, in my opinion, with the current owner, unless they catch lightning in a bottle like they did those 3 seasons a couple of years ago. It's everything. The perfect storm had to happen. They had to avoid injuries. They had to have a lot of those veteran pitchers work out, and they did. Liriano, AJ Burnett, you can go on and on. They got, finding Jason Grilli and turning him into an all-star closer. Right. Those kind of moves, it's very unusual for all those moves to work out. Typically, you end up getting a guy hurt. You end up with a suspension like Marte had a couple of years back. Those things happen. Every catcher they signed, for a couple of contract, lengths in a row worked out perfectly. Russell Martin turning into a great player. Those things just worked out. Everything worked out. But unless they catch lightning in a bottle under the current owner they have, and unless baseball gives ownership a reason to change, nothing isn't going to change. Why would he? He's making money. Baseball allows him to do what he's doing. I think Neil Huntington didn't get enough credit. I think he did a heck of a job with one hand tied behind his back, trying to win games. I think it just wasn't going to last. There's no way Huntington could have lasted, given the resources that he had or, quite frankly, didn't have. They did a heck of a job in the draft. And then, they spent money in the draft that other people weren't spending. Right. And then baseball comes along and says, no, you can't spend that much money in the draft. To me, spending money in the draft is like gambling on yourself, and so, they even took that away from them. So to paraphrase Rick Pitino, I don't think Mark Cuban's walking through that door anytime soon.
Right.
That's what they would need, a guy who doesn't care about, the bottom line. The bottom line for the owner has to be winning. And baseball doesn't make ownership do that. So I just think it's going to be a long –
without a standing ceiling, nothing's –
Yeah, exactly. Right. Without a ceiling, without a floor even. I just think it's going to be real difficult for for them to have any kind of sustained success, the way the Tampa Bay Devil Rays have, the way the Indians have, the way some of those smaller market teams have, the A's, for a period of time there as well, the Twins,
Marlins,
Kansas
even
City.
the Marlins.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's going to be very, very difficult. So I hate to say that, but baseball in Pittsburgh, I think baseball in general is not on great footing right now.
That's interesting you mentioned that, because I was going to ask you what you think is going to happen here. The owners and players just can't seem to find common ground. Are we going to have a season? Are they willing to let the other sports get started and jump over them? And, if they don't have baseball this year, I think I said this last week in my News and Noteworthy, because I read it several times. If they don't have a season this year, it's feasible next year's in jeopardy too. And then you're coming into a CBA after the 21 season. So what do you think? In your opinion?
Mark, what if you have a season what if you don't have a season and no one misses it? And the way things are lining up right now, assuming everybody comes back, you're going to have NBA playoffs. You're going to have, think about it from a Pittsburgh point of view. You're going to have a championship caliber team that has been playing at a championship caliber level for over a decade now in the Penguins, come back and start a sprint to another possible Stanley Cup. And you're going to have the Steelers, who are obviously king. The NFL's king everywhere anyway. So you're going to have NFL on track as usual. You're going to have NBA playoffs, and you're going to have hockey playoffs, and the potential of college football as well. So if you have all those things and baseball doesn't happen, no one's going to miss it. There's less fans than there ever have been. What if no one misses baseball? What does baseball have to stand on at that point? I think baseball has let athletes from the inner city get away from the game. There's basketball courts, there's NBA. The NBA spends money in the cities. The NFL spends money in their inner cities. Major League Baseball doesn't. They don't spend much here and there. They do, but they don't spend a ton of money in the inner cities. So they're losing that population. They're losing, I just think they're losing fans everywhere. The game is too long. The game is too boring. The pitching changes. And then you come down to this millionaire versus billionaire battle that we have going on right now. Who needs it? I think that's what so many fans are thinking about right now. And I just think they are, like you said, if there's no season this year, it puts next year in jeopardy as well. And then we're talking about, they need to overhaul the game somehow. I don't think they realize that.
Cutting 42 teams out of the minor league system, though, I think that's ridiculous. I think you need to find a better way to not cut those teams out. My son and I last summer went to 9 different ballparks. We have a minor league team in our town, and we go to those games all the time. And now they're talking about getting rid of them because their facilities don't meet the needs of today's players. You're high-level A baseball players. What exactly do you need? Right. It's kind of incredible to me that they have that mentality, almost like a holier than thou. And I don't see how they can actually have that mentality when you're getting the opportunity to play a child's game and earn money doing it.
It's incredible. And minor league baseball has existed for so long. It's been such a fabric of the game for so long. It's a beautiful experience. Again, that's one of the things I love about North Carolina, which is where I am now. There's so many minor league teams all over the place, and you can travel, 40 minutes in any direction and catch a game at any level almost. And, to lose that, I think, again, there's still a folksy part of baseball, and that's where it comes from, is the minor leagues. Players pay their dues. You have such a respect for the major leagues once you get there. I don't think the players in single A ball are the ones complaining, especially the ones who are now out of a job.
Right.
Again, it's just such a beautiful part of the game, such a fabric of, I hate to get too dramatic, but it's kind of a fabric of the American summer, I think, that's not the way to fix it, is to cut out that part of the game. There's parts of the game that we could do without. That's not one of them.
Our city's really holding out hope that they don't get rid of the keys, that they come back. You think the owners could be using this or baseball in general could be using this as a way of getting that salary cap or having the DH implemented, at least posturing themselves more significantly for the CBA after the 2021 season?
I think that makes sense. I think that's pretty good observation, really. I think if you look at, Cameron Hayward, as Steelers defensive lineman, said the other day on a conference call that COVID is not going to bend for the NFL. The NFL has to bend for COVID. And if you look at baseball, the bends that baseball is making, the changes that they're making are changes that are right inside the game. Football's not talking about, changing the 60 minutes that you're playing on Sunday. They're talking about, scheduling and training and that kind of stuff. Those are the changes that they're making. Same with hockey, same with basketball. Baseball's talking about changing the rules of the game. So yeah, I think if you look at it, maybe from the top, they're finally starting to realize we do have some issues. They're talking about, allowing re-entry this season, going DH, league wide, expanding the rosters. I think all of those sorts of things. Heck, they're talking about starting extra innings with guys on second base now. I think all of those things could be, permanent parts of the change if they play and see how these things go this year. I would never believe that, that's only for this year only. Those things could become permanent parts of the game. But again, you never know with baseball. One of the great places to try those out is on your minor leagues. And now they're getting rid of, talking about getting rid of a huge portion of the minor league system.
1/4 of it. 1/4 of the minor leagues they're talking about cutting out. Let's jump to the NFL a little, talk some Steeler football. Why do you think many people value Ben coming back? Is he the difference in the team? And what do you think about Mason Rudolph? Is he going to be the heir apparent to Ben, or are they going to have to go out and find somebody else?
Man, I think one of the big mistakes that the Steelers made this year, and I know you're limited with your cap, but I would have loved to have seen a veteran quarterback come in as a potential backup. That may still happen. There's still time, certainly. But boy, was it ever so obvious last year how much of a drop-off the Steelers had. And Mason Rudolph, I think, did a pretty decent job of managing the game for a while until his injury. And it was fun watching Duck for a little bit, but let's face it, we're talking about a guy who probably shouldn't be in the league, let alone starting on Sundays.
Tony, that team went 8-8. That team went 8-8
which is amazing. It's with no, with Duck Hodges in and out of the line, with Mason and Duck back and forth at the end of the season. Defense carried that team, obviously, but I think Ben does make that big a difference. I think even a subpar Ben gives them a much, much better offense. I think you can do things offensively. I think you can game plan a little bit differently. But I guess my first thought was, man, were we spoiled with Charlie Batch and Byron Leftwich coming off the bench. Those guys were veteran quarterbacks. When Ben was injured, when Ben was suspended, when Ben missed time, we talked about Jeff Capel not flinching. Those guys didn't flinch. They knew exactly what their role was. They knew what the offense looked like with them in it. And I don't think you had to do too much different when you had those kind of guys coming off the bench. When those were their two backups, Mark, they probably had 3 of the best 50 or 45 quarterbacks in the league. Those guys were better than most backup quarterbacks. And, it's just a huge, huge drop off. I think Landry Jones was a solid, maybe a typical NFL backup quarterback. I think the jury's out on whether Mason Rudolph can even be that. I don't know how they could possibly view him as the heir apparent. And, I understand them not going after a quarterback this year because, to me, they got to be all in trying to win right now. But they're going to have to make some real hard decisions real soon.
I kind of – Andrew Filipponi from The Fan, 93.7 The Fan, I loved his campaign to get Jameis Winston. Initially, I was kind of like, really, Winston? And then I start looking at facts about Winston, and I think I talked about him in one of my earlier episodes of my podcast. And, man, he's everything that would fit the Steelers system. I'm not exactly sure why they wouldn't go out and at least dangle something out there. I mean, he went to New Orleans on $1 million as a backup quarterback, and they signed the other guy. What's his name? The 30-year-old backup that they have now for Drew Brees. Like drawing a blank. Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. But
it's in Charlotte now, you mean?
No, the kid who's at New Orleans. Anyway, they already had a guy that they liked that comes in and gets some reps.
Oh, okay, right.
Multiple sets for New Orleans. So they bring in Winston for what? Is Winston going to be their starter after this year? Is that what the plan is? I mean, I thought he could have easily came into Pittsburgh, got some guidance, been put in a good position, learn under Ben, and he's only 25, 26 years old.
That's what's amazing. I think he's 25 still.
And he has 5 years of starting experience. You know, you can't let what he did last year under Bruce Arians and Brian Leftwich just chucking the ball all over the place be an indicator of his whole entire career. I mean, I thought that was just asinine, to be quite honest with you. I really would have liked to have seen them gone out and you know, dangle something in front of him.
I think it would have been a perfect fit because, again, I mean, you know, he's willing to be a backup, and you're willing to be a backup to a guy who's a, you know, probable Hall of Famer. It isn't like you're being asked to sit behind, some Joe Sixpack somewhere. So
Taysom Hill.
And right. And, you know, chances of him playing as a backup to Roethlisberger are pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, guys that are 38 years old typically don't take every snap over a 16-game season. So the chances of getting in there and playing a little bit. And then, yeah, I think there's a real good chance that, next year in Pittsburgh, things could have led toward him, you know, taking over. And I think there's enough leadership in the Steeler locker room as well that wouldn't have been an issue. And there weren't, you know, I think people maybe sometimes tend to misunderstand Winston. Yeah, he did have some issues. He's had some issues in the NFL. None of it was locker room related. Never heard anybody say this guy was a cancer or this guy caused any kind of internal strife. I think he needs to mature, and I don't know that there would have been a better way. I think Tomlin is very good at that kind of a thing, and I think that would have been a great fit. That's obviously not going to happen. And again, I think that's to Pittsburgh's detriment that they don't have a veteran backup.
I've read and heard many of the beat writers, and especially the Athletics' Ed Bouchette, say that Juju will not be a Steeler after this year, and quite possibly James Conner as well. What do you think about the future of those two guys, and quite frankly, the future of the Steeler organization? I mean, Ben's 38. He's commanding $34 million a year. He's the second highest paid quarterback starting the season. You've got these two guys who just 2 years ago were the marquee players, right, essentially, because Juju won the team MVP. Where are they headed? What do you think about those two guys? You think they'll be back?
You know, you mentioned Ed Bouchette. He's as good as anybody, by the way. I think he's as good an NFL writer as there is in the country. But I don't think that their situation is unique to the Steelers. I think that the way the contracts are structured now, everybody who's in the position of a Juju or a Connor, you know, the media starts to hyper-focus on that stuff. Okay, let's take a look at that rookie, fifth-year option. What are they going to do? Are they going to pull the trigger there? They've got to decide now. They've got to decide before the season. And they almost make it like an either-or. And that's not always the case. Either the player's going to play his way out of that contract, or he's going to do well and he's going to be, he's going to be too expensive for the team to re-sign. I think that is legitimately the case sometimes. I don't know if that's always the case every time, and I think we kind of jumped the gun on that looking at those two guys' situations. Their situations were impacted by the offense last year. Certainly, I think it's fair to say had Ben been there for 16 games, Juju's numbers would have been different. James Conner, man, you have to just wonder if all the physical issues he went through at Pitt have taken a toll on his body. When he's healthy, and even last year, when he was healthy, his yards per carry were pretty darn good. He just wasn't healthy, and quite frankly, you can't have a guy like that be your main man if you can't stay healthy. So it's a big year for both of those guys. I don't know that I've ever enjoyed covering a player as much as Connor when he played at Pitt, even coming out of high school in Erie. Talk about high character guys, man. There just aren't many guys with, it's just a high character person, whether he's playing football or not. Juju did stumble without AB being there. I think that's clear. So, can those guys step up and have big seasons? I think you're going to see one of those guys there, for a longer term, if they're both successful. It may become the kind of a situation where they got to decide either or. But you're right. The future of this team, man, they got to win now. I have no issue with them deciding we're putting all our eggs in 2020 because we have to win now. Man, a franchise quarterback is so essential. It's just so essential. It's going to be really hard to find another guy at that level. think about between Bradshaw and Ben, man. There were some guys that had some decent years. We forget, Neil O'Donnell and Cordell Stewart take a lot of flack. Those guys were in championship games. Those were the best of the litter between Terry and Ben. So
I have those
it's
conversations all the
a lot of
time.
franchise.
What do you think is going to be their strength on the field this year then?
Man, I love that defense. And I was just thinking, before we started the talk, I was trying to decide, okay, what level of that defense is their strength? Is it the secondary? And I said, well, what if Bud Dupree has another year like he had last year? Is there going to be anybody with two better, outside rushers than Dupree and Watt? What if Stephen Tuitt's healthy all season? And what if Cam Hayward continues to play at the level he played at last year? They could have as good a defensive line as anybody in the league. They're going to lose Mark Barron, who played quite a bit, but Vince Williams can play, and Devin Bush seems to still be on the rise. They might have as good a unit of linebackers as anybody. Watt is a player of the year candidate. Minkah Fitzpatrick might be the best secondary player the Steelers have had since Troy Polamalu. Those guys are both defensive players of the year candidates. It would have been really cool somehow to hang on to Sean Davis and have him be a safety coming off the bench as well. I don't know that they'd have had a better set of safeties had that been the case. But I guess I'm going to end up settling on the secondary and maybe even corner, because I think they've got the depth at cornerback that they might not have at safety. So, just saying all those names gets me excited about what we could see defensively. Can they do what they did again last year? I loved hearing Cam Hayward say, hey, we led the league in sacks. We led the league in turnovers. We got to get better against the run. Talk about leadership. I think they've got so much in place defensively that it would be a shame not to have some type of a match on the offensive side, because that defense.
You got to sign Cam, and you got to sign Joe Hayden too. So you got some big decisions out there.
Well, and again, those guys are at the age where, okay, do we sign them and gamble that they're going to be able to play at a high level still, or do we get rid of them before they start that decline? The Steelers have been so good usually in making those decisions. They usually make the correct call on when to let a guy go. Lawrence Timmons, another pretty good example of letting a guy go at the right time.
Yep. Where do you see the Steelers finishing the season? If they're 3 straight years out of the playoffs, though, is this it for Mike Tomlin? Is his tenure done in Pittsburgh?
Man, two great questions. This has got to be a playoff team if they stay healthy offensively, I think. I think they've got to be a playoff team. Can Connor stay healthy? Can Juju return to form? If those two things happen and Ben's healthy, I don't know why they couldn't make a run, honestly. Those are a lot of ifs, and how many times do all the ifs happen? So a lot of ifs there. Looking at Tomlin, I think Mike Tomlin is a heck of a football coach. The success he's had has been almost unprecedented. The only guy with a better record during his tenure has been Bill Belichick. But 3 straight missed opportunities, especially with the defense they have this year. I hate to see the Steelers firing a coach with that much success. They haven't done that in my lifetime, So I would hate to see them have to do that. And I hate to see Tomlin's era end that way. But boy, I got to think the seat's pretty hot. It would have been unfair to make a move last year with everything they faced. And I think he really did do a pretty darn good job last year, even in spite of the final 3 games. But I think you have to acknowledge the seat's got to be hot.
It's unfortunate, those final 3 games, because that's what people are going to remember. They're not going to remember that they were 8-5 going into that. They're going to remember that they finished with 3 straight losses, and really they didn't play very good football. But I'm not the biggest Tomlin fan, because I watch and I pay attention, and as a football coach myself, I see him making the same mistakes instead of correcting those mistakes. However, he seems to have such great rapport with those players, and his coaches seem to respect him so much that he gets what he needs out of everybody from every aspect.
And I think that's what makes it such a tough call. I mean, I think there's no question that, just throwing out clock management, that is and remains an issue that they don't seem to have corrected. So that's just one of many issues. How his teams consistently lose 1 or 2 games a year to teams they are clearly so much better than. Those are problematic. But again, you're right. The rapport he has, the respect he has from the players. Anytime you make a coaching change, to me, you've got to, making a change just for the sake of making a change is almost always a mistake. Can we get better? Is there someone that's going to give us something better than what we've had? If you can definitely answer that with with an affirmative, then go ahead and make your move. The Steelers are also a great position where they are still so respected league-wide. Anybody knows that if you work for the Rooneys, you are going to get treated with the utmost respect. You're going to have job security. Again, I think it's so remarkable when you look back since 1969. I don't know that that's possible in any industry, let alone the NFL or professional sports, to have 3, head coaches, but you go industry wide to have 3 CEOs, to have three superintendents, to have 3 athletic directors, anything like that is just, it's astounding. And I would hate to see that change if it didn't have to.
All right, let's change gears one last time. You can't end this conversation without talking a little bit about the Penguins. So potentially restarting, getting Jake Gensel back. How do you think they'll fare in the 2014 playoff setting or format that they have manifested?
Man, I think that format is so great for the Penguins. I just think there's so many reasons why that's such a great format, such a reason to get excited. Yes, everybody has the same amount of rest. Nobody has any momentum. All that stuff is true for every team, all the 24 teams that are going to be back in the playoffs. But when you've got guys who can, when your core of guys, and if you want to say that core is, you have to at least include Malkin, Letang, and Sidney Crosby, all over 30, guys that could really use that rest. And then, the young guy who you'd put into that core as well is a guy coming off of an injury who otherwise wouldn't be ready to play. And maybe Matt Murray needed a nice long respite as well to get his head together. I just think that the way that whole thing lines up, when you have a sprint to the finish, I think that the Penguins are in a really unique position to make another run. Why not this year? I hate that they would play the Canadiens and a goalie as good as Carey Price in a potentially short series. Price goes out and shuts you down 3 times, and you're done. You're home again. You're golfing already. But other than that, and I don't mean to minimize the opponent, Price is the kind of guy that can steal a series. But I think they are really well suited for a run this year, and I think it would be great if they can get back and play because it could be a lot of fun.
Well, traditionally, and you talk about that core of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, guys like that usually don't. Normally in the NHL, they don't win a cup over the age of 30, especially as the marquee players. I mean, you definitely see that group getting another cup.
I think they have a great chance this year. I really do. And if Matt Murray can be what he was a couple of years ago, I think that window stays open. I don't think it's ready to come crashing down yet. They've got some good young players in Gensel. It looks like John Marino has been a great find on the blue line.
That kid's spectacular.
They can continue. It really is astounding that was an incredible trade. A guy I neglected to mention who I think is going to be helped by the rest as well is Patrick Hornquist, who's going to come out and be ready to throw his body all over the ice. Yeah. I think even beyond this year, the window does stay open a little bit. You're right. It's really, really hard to keep winning into your 30s. And maybe those 2 back-to-back cups were it. I don't think there's any reason to be upset if that was the case. It's going to be hard to turn the page again, but it's coming. But, Sidney stays in such great shape all the time. I mean, I think Crosby has several years left. He can keep the concussion problems away.
I can see Malkin sticking around for another 8 years. Honestly.
Those guys are physically fit. Heck, we talked about 2 guys being physically fit, and I didn't mention Letang, who might be the most physically fit guy ever to put a Penguins uniform on. But your game does decline at some point. That is inevitable. But if they can continue to find those other pieces, I think the window does stay open a little bit. And I don't know that there's anybody – I thought the Islanders were going to be a team that was going to come on. That really hasn't happened. They've taken some steps back. Same with Toronto, a team that I thought was going to be, a team with a future by now. That hasn't happened either. So that leaves the Penguins and the Capitals still saying, hey, we still got these Hall of Famers. We're still here.
Yeah, I agree. All right. I'm going to put the GM's hat on you. You're Jim Rutherford, and you got a difficult choice to make. It's the point where you got to choose between Matt Murray and Tristan Jarry. Who are you taking?
You know, I think that the struggles Murray had this year were real. I mean, his numbers were just I don't want to say awful, but they certainly weren't good. You hate to play as much as he did and have a save percentage under 900. His numbers were bad. The defense wasn't always great, but it was certainly good enough, and we've seen him perform better. I don't know what his issue is, whether it's mental or not. He's still very, very young. Jarry finally sort of stepped into the spotlight and did what we thought he was going to do. I mean, years ago, we thought Jarry was even a better prospect than Murray, and they sort of flip-flopped there. I feel like you have to go with Murray. The idea of letting one guy who's won a couple of Stanley Cups go, and then follow that up by letting another guy who's got a couple of Stanley Cups on his shelf go would just be really, really difficult to do. Rutherford's not afraid to make the tough decisions, though. I mean, I think if he looks at those guys and says, Jarry's got a higher ceiling, he's got to be the guy. He won't be afraid to make that decision. And he's earned that by putting some more cups on the shelf. So problem is Murray is definitely Sully's guy, in a big way. So it's a really hard decision, man. I just think you have to go with the guy who's got the hardware.
Is Jason Botterill going to come back to Pittsburgh? He got cut loose by Buffalo.
Yeah. I think that's why not? Everybody's familiar with working with him. It would be almost, again, if Rutherford's ready to step down, could be kind of a seamless transition.
He gets it too.
He definitely gets it. He's comfortable with the organization. The organization is comfortable with him. I think the players are comfortable with him.
Yeah.
There are still some guys who do know him and who did work with him in that organization. So, he's also a very, very smart guy financially. You're not going to see them strapped like what was it, a couple seasons ago? They couldn't field a full roster the last week of the season because it was such a mess.
Defenseman. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Unbelievable. I think that would, again, that would, it's not a coincidence, Mark, right, that the Pirates have so many issues and that things kind of work out like this for the Penguins. They're not lucky. It's a championship caliber organization. They just are, their goal every year is to win a Stanley Cup. They know it's not going to happen every year, but boy, they have been in that conversation just about every year for the past decade plus. And that's not a coincidence. They make the right decisions.
It baffles me how you've got three owners there of three different major sports in a city that is completely enthralled with its sports teams. And you've got two owners that are willing to spend as much as they can to keep a great product on the field or on the ice and also make their money. And then you've got another owner who's like, I don't care if we win or not. I just want to make my money. And then he's not making money now because his attendance is dropping. It's just crazy. I don't know. That's the difference in business, I guess. I don't know.
It doesn't make sense, and it's sad, I think. I mean, I really think it is sad. I mean, the Pirates fans, and just go back to the Cueto game, right, when they finally make the playoffs, they're dying to support that team. Heck, even just talking about that game right now, I just got chills. It can be such an incredibly dramatic and such a special atmosphere. And you talked about Jason Botterill getting it. Pirates are stuck with someone who just doesn't get it.
All right. So we've run the gamut of sports questions. Let me take you down the road for one more final question here before we get into decade definers. Sports don't exist, and your option of being a teacher is not out there because you're currently a teacher. What would be your ultimate dream job?
Let me go on the road with the Black Crowes as their roadie. That's what I'll do. You probably got to rewind it a couple of years. They're getting old too, but like the 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, I'll be a roadie for the Black Crowes. Again, remember I talked about I don't want to wear a tie or a jacket.
Yeah.
I'm not going to wear a tie or a jacket or a collar or socks for that matter, or shoes.
I get you. Hey, I wear T-shirt, sweatshirt, and some shorts every day. I teach PE, health, and first aid, so I truly understand. All right. So I do this thing called Decade Definers where I choose 5 of the most prolific performers or teams starting with the 70s, and then I go through each decade up through the 2010s. Today you're going to take part in by giving us yours based on the following decade definers. What are the 5 most memorable games that you covered throughout your career?
This is awesome. I had a ton of fun trying to come up with 5 for this, reliving some great memories. So I'm going to go back all the way to 1992, mid-October 1992, and it's the first the first sporting event I ever covered. I was working for the Pitt radio station at the time, and I covered a Penguins-Montreal Canadiens game. It was October 92, so we're talking about some Hall of Famers just, everywhere you look.
Oh, yeah.
You see a Hall of Famer, Joe Mullen, Yager. Trottier was gone by that point, but obviously Mario and Kevin Stevens, Tom Barrasso. My gosh, just incredible. So yeah, I got to interview Mario after the game. I asked him a question about his back, which was probably not a great question, but I was just a college kid. Mario had a goal and a couple of assists. Kevin Stevens had a big game. Barrasso outplayed Patrick Waugh. Penguins won, I think 5-2. I went back and found the box score. So that would definitely be one, not because of anything memorable about the game, but it's the first time I was ever in that kind of an atmosphere. So that was number 1. Number 2, I'm going to give you a regular season game, December 2008 at Heinz Field on the Steelers' magical march to the Super Bowl that year. A defensive battle. They're playing the Cowboys. Just a game that was very frustrating most of the game. Then the Steelers were losing 13-3 going into the fourth quarter. Jeff Reed kicks a field goal. It's 13-6. Then the magic starts. Roethlisberger leads a long drive, hits Heath Miller for a touchdown right before the 2-minute warning. Dallas gets the ball back. Sticks are playing. They've got the Renegade blaring through the stadium. Yeah. And I think it was second down, and Deshae Townsend intercepts Romo, takes it to the house. Steelers had no business winning that game. They win 20-13. The place absolutely exploded. It was a Sunday night game as well. It was just an incredible thing to witness, to be in the locker room after that game. So that was a regular season game that was just insane. Most dramatic regular season game I'd ever been to. And again, the Hall of Famers just, left and right all over the place. I'm going to go to Pitt basketball for this one. Another regular season game, February of 2009. February 2009. This was the Jamie Dixon team that went to the Elite Eight that lost in that Scotty Reynolds game, losing to Villanova. But UConn's coming into the Peterson Event Center on a Saturday afternoon. UConn's number 1 in the country. Pitt's number 4. And the legendary matchup that day was going to be DeJuan Blair versus Hashim Thabit. Blair held Thabit to 5 points and 4 rebounds. Blair had 22 rebounds and 22 points. It might have been 23 rebounds. Just a dominant performance. That's when that Pitt program was electric. You could just feel it in the air. Just such a buzz. So it was a regular season game, but maybe the certainly one of the coolest games I ever covered. And because it was a number 1 team, the Big East was incredible at that time. I have that as number 3. I'm going to throw a wrench into this. I hope you're going to let this one go. This was not a game. This was an intra-squad scrimmage.
Okay.
It was a year before what I just mentioned, August of 2007. Dave Wanstead's there. He's struggling. It's, I think, his second or third year there. Pitt's incumbent starting running back was LaRod Stevens-Howland. Had a couple of good years in the NFL. Had a pretty decent NFL career for a 5'7" guy from Johnstown. So he's the starting running back. At this time, too, Mark Wanstead would let the media see every single play of every single scrimmage. It was an open scrimmage. And on Saturday afternoons, this was their first scrimmage of the year, he would invite a ton of former players and coaches back. So it was a really big event. It wasn't a game, but these were big events. It was a pretty special day. So Howling is the starter. After 2 or 3 series, they take Howlings out and they put in a freshman running back, and everyone starts to talk a little bit. The players, the coaches are looking at each other. This freshman running back's first carry goes for about 4 or 5 yards. His second carry, he breaks a tackle, goes off tackle, sort of breaks a tackle of a defensive lineman. Doesn't really break a tackle as much as he sheds a tackle, doesn't really let the guy grab him, busts one outside and goes for about 65 yards. That was LaShawn McCoy's first 2 carries or forced, first really anything as a member of the Pitt football team. And the thing I remember the most is the former players and coaches, their jaws truly hitting the floor, saying, wow, what did Wani do? This kid might really be living up to the hype. And, he was the NFL's leading rusher in yards from scrimmage over the past decade. So that was a really, really neat moment. It was electric. You could feel something's about to happen here. And I'm going to count that one as a game. The number one sums up my career. It's the most memorable moment of my career, and that was the AFC Championship game about 6 weeks after that Cowboys game. Steelers-Ravens, again, heck of a battle, heck of a game. It was, I think, a 4 o'clock, a 3:30 start. It was below freezing. It was a cold day. By the time the game ended, it was in the low 20s probably. Steelers were in charge the whole game. Willis McGahee scores a touchdown in the fourth quarter to bring the Ravens within 2. And then maybe the single most impressive individual play I've ever seen in person was Troy Polamalu's interception return, where he just dances all the way across the field, slithers into the end zone. And the place – I talked about the place getting loud when they played the Cowboys and they beat the Cowboys. The last 2 minutes of the game, the media is allowed to go onto the field. And just standing there hearing that place, you couldn't even hear yourself think. Trying to have a conversation to the guy next to you, you couldn't even hear yourself talk. It was so loud, so impressive. And again, that's one of those moments that, even though it was a kind of a roller coaster career as a sports writer, just being there and looking around and seeing that stadium the way it was something I'll never forget. Far and away, that was my number one.
He's a special player, man. He was a special player. Anytime you got to watch him play, whether it was on TV or in person, and I've seen him play both. I mean, I just relished that. He was incredible. There
are certain players that you can throw the stats out when you talk about, is he a Hall of Famer? All you had to do was watch Troy Polamalu play football. I mean, it was something else. And again, the thing, the Ravens, I know Steelers fans hate the Ravens, but boy, for a long time there, talk about the big boys of that division. It was the Steelers and the Ravens, man. I mean, nobody else, forget for the Bengals here or there. No, Steelers and the Ravens played big boy football in the AFC North. It was them or nobody. And the respect between the two teams, I think, was just enormous. They hated each other, but boy, they respected the heck out of each other. How could you not after those drag out fights they would have?
Same style of football.
Exact same style.
You could have changed uniforms
and not known
who was who because it was the same stuff. I live down here, and it's ironically it's either Ravens, Redskins, or Cowboys, and then you've got a nice group of Steeler fans down here. But I don't have a problem with Ravens fans, even when we play them. I have to respect them because it's like looking in the mirror.
No doubt. And talk about Polamalu. We would have known from their build, but they had a Polamalu on their side as well. I mean, Ed Reed he's in the argument. If you're going to have a conversation with best safety of that era, you got to mention both of those guys, right?
I love that Reed style play too. Hey, I want to thank my guest, Tony Defazio. He's the former editor of Pittsburgh Sports Report, and you can catch Tony on PA Sports Now Radio every Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. Tony, thanks so much for coming on the show. Enjoy your summer. Before you know it, you'll be back to teaching.
Yes, sir. Yeah, Mark, you too. This was a blast. Really enjoyed it. Good luck. Good luck with the podcast, and hope to enjoy and listen to a lot more great shows.
Take care now.
You too. Thanks.